We now have the full Fort Worth Police Department chase policy.
Yeah, just yesterday we told you the department released a highly redacted version of that policy, but our I-team spent the day having that unredacted version being confirmed through multiple sources. The I-team has reviewed that policy, and they asked an expert to do the exact same thing. But in light of concerns raised by the police chief, we've decided not to publish the details of that policy.
Our investigative reporter Brian New joins us live now from Fort Worth. And Brian, it's perhaps important for people to know that the reason we've been requesting this policy for months now. So what's behind all of this here?
Yeah, Ken, the goal of our investigation is to find out how the Fort Worth police policy protects people who are not directly involved in a chase from being injured or killed. It's a question we've been working to answer ever since we were asked that question by family members of an innocent victim.
We're talking about an innocent person who was going about the business of their day. And in the process of doing that, he was killed. He was killed.
For the past 7 months, the family of 57-year-old Andre Craig has been looking for answers. Ever since Craig, an innocent bystander, was killed by a Fort Worth police chase.
We still would like to know what Fort Worth PD's policy is around high-speed pursuits. What's the policy?
On Monday, the Fort Worth Police Department released a version of its chase policy that included 8 restricted sections. But the CBS News Texas I-team obtained the full policy and has compared it with other policies in North Texas. We also gave it to law enforcement expert Alex Del Carmen.
I think the policy that Fort Worth has in place on police pursuits is pretty consistent with the policies that I have reviewed and I have seen across the United States. I will say that if there is a variable of difference between the Fort Worth policy and other policies is the fact that in this particular case, they're very precise and they're very detailed.
Del Carmen says some of those details could give criminals insight into circumstances which officers would call off a chase. But Del Carmen adds much of what Fort Worth has kept hidden would not give criminals an upper hand.
Whether it's Fort Worth, Dallas, or whatever, I typically side with the public's right to know. And there are very few things, and I underscore few, that law enforcement should not disclose to the public.
Last month, Fort Worth police chased a suspected drunk driver through the West 7th Entertainment District. The driver ended up injuring pedestrians. Del Carmen says now seeing the department's full policy, he has concerns in the way officers responded.
We don't know all of the circumstances, but we do know that the individual was driving erratically, but we also know that the officer, from what I could see, actually went against traffic for a particular period of time. That is really not allowed.
As for the case that killed Andre Craig, Del Carmen says there's simply too many unknowns to answer the question for the Craig family on whether officers that evening followed department policy.
In your opinion, does the Fort Worth policy do enough to protect innocent bystanders?
You know, Brian, I don't think there's any policy in the United States that does, quote unquote, enough to protect innocent bystanders. I would suggest to Fort Worth, you know, just like I would suggest to any other police department across the nation, if you've had one innocent person die as a result of any chases that have taken place in your police department in recent history, you should definitely bring your team in, sit down, and figure out if there are things in your policy that you could have done differently in order to be able to safeguard the life of that innocent person.
Fort Worth Police told me this evening that it is constantly reviewing its policies to ensure that they align with the best practices in law enforcement and the best practices at the national level. However, when we compared the Fort Worth policy with new recommendations that came out from the Department of Justice in a report last fall, we found several differences. Nicole, the new federal report that came out in the fall from the Department of Justice recommends that officers only engage in a pursuit if it's a violent felon and there's an immediate threat to the public.
And I think those details, that context, Brian, is really important because I said yesterday, the reason why you all were asking for this policy was because there were other lives and real people on the other ends of these cases. So at this point, we get the full version. We're not sharing the full details. But do we have any sense that Fort Worth might at some point release more of its policy?
Yeah, so the Fort Worth Police Department told me that the version, the redacted version that they released Monday, came after a careful and thorough review. The city still plans on proceeding with its lawsuit against the Texas Attorney General to protect those sections that it did not release. So, Nicole, really outside of a court order, it seems unlikely that the city will make any more of its pursuit policy public.
Brian New with the I-Team, we really appreciate the update. Thank you so much.